Welcome back, Chappelle. All right, so welcome back to a very special day. It's Sunday. You have tomorrow off from school. Happy Martin Luther King Day. It's my anniversary. We've been married for 6 years today, and the Eagles are in the playoffs. Now, anyway, look. But big thing about it is though, is we're gonna pick up off. Wait, whoa. Let's back that up. We're going to pick up right where we left off in class, right? So we're going to pick right up where we left off in class, the C and D period. G period, of course, I'll see you guys tomorrow. Make sure, study for that quiz and stuff, even though, ironically enough, when you're watching this, you'll have already taken the quiz, so saying that was pretty pointless. Now, but getting into it, though, okay? We left off talking about this thing that many people in textbooks and stuff like that often refer to as, the triangular trade, right? Now, even some historians will even still use this word, triangular trade. I am one of those historians that feels as though that's a very misleading word that we use to pander to people and act like this thing has like different little directions, right? So we talked about the first three legs, or the three legs in general. We talked about manufactured goods going from Europe to Africa. We talked about slaves being transported from the west coast of Africa to the Americas, which again is one of the most horrifying things in all of history that we will actually spend most of this flip talking about, which is actually literally one of those things that we wish that we could be able to go back and erase. However, it's one of those things that we need to actually be able to understand more so we can understand our current situation. But also, then you got your third leg, when merchants would carry sugar, molasses, cotton, rum, tobacco, and other plantation products back to the first leg. And according to a lot of very dinky little kind of old school textbooks, it looks a lot like this. Now, look how simplistic this is. This is why I hate the phrase triangle trade, right? I hate the phrase triangle trade because it makes you think in your mind that it looks like this, when in all actuality, it actually looked much more like this, right? This is what that transatlantic trade network actually looked like. So as you can even see, a lot of different textbooks are even starting to call it the triangle trade system now, right? So I, though, think that it makes much more sense to call it the transatlantic trade network, right? This transatlantic trade network, as well as you can see, goes back and forth and in this direction and in that direction. It skips legs, it goes over legs, it does whatever it needs to, right? So it actually can move in different directions. Also, you've got areas coming from all the way from India, bringing spices all the way back to the entire west coast of Africa. It's not necessarily just focusing on three different legs in three different directions. So the term triangle trade can be very misleading, but it is important to know that actually why it's misleading and what it means to be misleading and things like that, right? Now, when you're looking at the transatlantic trade network or the triangle trade network in general, we do have a lot of positives and several humongous negatives that actually kind of demonstrate themselves throughout Western civilization's history. So the biggest thing about it, though, is just so even though that the positive list is a little bit longer, these negatives greatly outweigh these positives, right? So the positives, of course, of this trade network are going to be the fact that it makes a lot of money, right? It makes a ton of money. It sends economics forward. It sends the economics forward in some places like England, which would later lead to the Industrial Revolution, which kind of brings us into the modern era that we live in now, right? Cultural diffusion, of course, is going to be another massive one as well, where cultures are going to spread through this trade network. You're going to see international relations increase. You're also going to see the establishment of new countries and new nation states because of this trade network. The Caribbean, South, Central America, as well as the United States and Canada would have never actually grown to be as large as they are now if they had not actually had this transatlantic trade network as a part of their upbringing and as a part of their foundation. Now, however, the massive negatives that outweigh these positives include the loss of human life, right? And of course, actually understanding how precious human life is, we need to understand the fact that ships could be lost at sea on this thing, leading to the death of its sailors. We also see ships being lost at sea that contained on them African slaves in the hundreds, right? And those people never wanted to leave their homes, never planned to leave their homes, and were being forced to do so, and this whole network would actually lead to their deaths, right? So that is a very, very big thing to remember and kind of keep in mind while we're talking about this. It's going to increase the dependency on slavery by many of these new colonies in North, South, and Central America. Due to the availability of slaves coming in through this entire network, it's going to increase slavery dramatically, right? We'll talk about a lot of these different percentages and things like that were going on as well. And also due to the failing encomienda system that was killing the natives in South and Central America, you're going to see the increased need for slavery as well in Spanish colonies. And it's also going to promote racism, right? The Triangle Trade Network and the Transatlantic Trade Network is going to be one of the key factors that's going to lead people that are in these colonies to looking at people of Native and African descent as being lesser than or being only needed for economic growth, right? Which is literally looking at them like the same that you would look at a horse or a cow or a beast of burden as, which is absolutely ridiculous, right? So like I said, these negatives greatly outweigh these positives. So now the big thing about it, though, going forward, is you have to also understand that this middle passage, that second leg of the trade network, is the thing that the entire network kind of focuses around, right? So this second leg, known as the middle passage, is absolutely horrific. You're talking about humans being moved like cargo, right? We're talking about humans being moved the same way that you would move a box, right? Like that is absolutely ridiculous. The conditions were disgusting. As you can see, they were crammed together and cramped underneath decks, and they would sometimes go days on end without sunlight or without being fed or without water, right? So to understand this, let's start at the very beginning and really kind of understand how these Africans are getting to these ships and how they're being forced into a life of enslavement that would later on take them to North and South and Central America. Now, first of all, you have to understand a lot of these Africans are being taken from inland villages, right? So these inland villages are mostly on the western coast of Africa. Africa being a massive continent and the second largest continent in the world, you have to understand by square mileage, this is a very, very long coastline, right? The western coast of Africa was littered with smaller villages that were like sometimes 1,500 to 2,000 miles inland, right? Now, what would end up happening a lot of the times is that you have to understand is sub-Saharan or sub-Sahelian, as some many like evolutionary biologists refer to it as. So sub-Saharan Africans were still in a very tribal state, right? Still in a very big state of like being semi-nomadic and being subsistence farmers and being able to only like use certain goods to be able to survive, right? Those different tribes would sometimes go to war with one another. When this war would occur, some Africans would take the losing tribe on as like their actual like enslaved populace, right? So what would end up happening is Africans would then trade these enslaved people to Europeans for processed goods, right? The Europeans showed up with things like guns, cannons, cloth, cash, all this stuff and said, hey, well, look, you're not, like, we can give you this and it'll make you even stronger in war. It'll make you even better hunters and stuff like that. And so basically the Europeans are taking advantage of the tribal state of Africa. And then later on, as time goes on into the 1800s, they basically then take advantage of the people that they sold goods to and then bring them into slavery as well, which is a very disgusting system of how this thing progressed. Now, after being enslaved, many of these Africans were forced to march to coastal plains chained together, coastal ports chained together. Men, women, and children would be bound together in long lines, and they would be forced to walk distances of up to 1,000 miles, right? Now, just so you understand how far that is, walking 1,000 miles, that's the same as walking chained together from Archbishop Chappelle High School to Washington, D.C. That is a massive journey, right? We're talking about a very long way. This would lead to the death of many of the people that were actually being brought to these slave ports. It would lead to the destruction of many of their like actual appendages and body parts and stuff like that, forever scarring them for the rest of their lives, if they even were able to make it to the Americas, where they would then be sold into slavery, right? Which is absolutely disgusting, right? So now the big thing going on as well is that then they would be slammed onto slave vessels, right? Around 90% of all slaves were taken or picked up on the western coast of Africa, in modern-day countries like Ghana and the Ivory Coast, right? Ghana, the Ivory Coast, Niger as well, and many of the other western coastal areas. Now, slaves were then crammed beneath the decks and separated by gender as well. Literally, all male slaves would be put on a certain deck, and all female and children slaves would be put onto another one. They were crammed below decks and then bound together in chains, and they could have up to 500 people per ship. These ships had no plumbing. They had no way for these people to go to the bathroom. They had literally only certain times that they would bring them above deck to actually give them sunlight to keep them alive, right? They literally treated them as if they were cargo, like I said earlier, and they did not care about their health or their progress. They just wanted to get them there alive if they could. Now, this is going to also lead to massive spread of disease, as we can see right here. The worst of them all being known as Amoebic Dysentery, which would actually lead to the person actually evacuating themselves so ferociously that they would dehydrate, and that dehydration would kill them, right? So a very large percentage of these Africans would actually die en route from the slave ports to the actual Americas, because the journey could last anywhere from up to 3 weeks to 3 months. And so you're talking about being stuck below a deck of a ship, chained together, and being constantly harassed or intimidated by the sailors, because a lot of the sailors, which are predominantly Portuguese sailors at this time, are actually threatening these people constantly with weapons and beatings and things like that, due to the fact that they were constantly trying to prevent a slave revolt from occurring occurring on these vessels. They would keep anything out of their reach. They would keep them chained to the floor. And then also on top of everything else, if one row of slaves did get a disease, they would sometimes cut one chain and then throw several people overboard. So they would actually kill people just to prevent other people on the vessel from getting a disease as well. And then also you're going to see some disgusting things happen as well, including suicide by some of these slaves to avoid enslavement, or also the killing of their children so their children never have to be enslaved. So this is a very, very disgusting marker on history, right? So like also ships faced a ton of other risks, like storms, pirate raids, other like the different things like that could lead to the sinking of the vessel and the death of all 500 people that are on it. Looking at this image right here, this is a map of a slave vessel that is on its way to the Americas. Look at how these people are being stored. They're literally being stored, laying down, chained together, literally being moved like as if they could put as many people on there as possible. Sometimes trips as many as 500, right? So, and around half of the slaves between being picked up on the coastal ports of Africa, then getting all the way to the Americas are going to die from gross mistreatment, right? Now, you're going to see, like, now this, again, really, really quickly, that estimate of about half is using whatever records we have. It could be as bad as half or it could be as low as 25%. We're not positive, but still, regardless, 1% is too many. So some Africans would even kill themselves or their children just to avoid being enslaved. And they were oftentimes dropped off in a couple of key places, including Brazil or the Caribbean, because they were being heavily used in mining gold and silver, but then also being used on the sugarcane plantations as well. Now, this pie chart right here, which will probably definitely show up on your test, as we know with like our different like stimulus packs that actually go on our multiple choice questions, this pie chart shows that the slaves were distributed through the New World between 1500 and 1870. So as you can see, the bulk of the slaves went to what is now modern-day Brazil. Now, this is going to also show you that you're going to end up in the Spanish Caribbean, the British Caribbean, French Caribbean. Now, all of these areas, though, in the modern, like modern day, speak either French or Portuguese. So this actually leads to a very, very large base of what you would call Afro-Latino population, or a very, very large group of people that are actually black that speak Spanish, right? So there is a huge amount of Afro-Latinos that exist in these areas now to this day, and that break up a very predominant subclass of people that exist there. And we'll talk more as well when we get into the colonization of Spain and the growth of like different Spanish colonies and stuff, how we'll get into the development of social classes and how like there was a heavy amount of mixed race going on and things like that, and we'll talk about that as we get closer to it. But then as you can see, about 6% of them ended up in what is now the modern day United States. Now, so getting after it though as well, the impact of the Atlantic slave trade is what you really need to understand, is that many African cities, villages, and societies are going to be completely destroyed as these colonies actually grow, right? So while the colonies in the Americas and South America end up growing and becoming economically affluent, a lot of these like cities and villages that had their own customs and languages and designs and interpretations of the world around them are going to be completely destroyed. So there are literally probably languages that aren't even spoken anymore because they were destroyed by the Atlantic slave trade. About 2,000 slaves were sent to the Americas every year in the 1500s. But then by the 1700s, that number grows to 80,000 a year, due to the fact that there's going to be a heavy impact of cotton farming, especially in North America. Now, by the 1800s, 11 million slaves had reached the Americas, but about 2 million of them had perished in the slave trade, which is absolutely disgusting and ridiculous, and it is an event that is on par with other genocides that we discuss in history that needs to be focused on and needs to be discussed, right? So now going forward, though, what we're going to be doing when we get into class is we're actually going to be changing gears completely, right? So that last thing right there is the end of the exploration period. I'm going to be posting your study guide tomorrow, okay? So on Martin Luther King Day, I'll be posting your study guide, and it'll actually like help you get ready for your test. But the second half of your test is going to be focused on this. It's the era known as the Scientific Revolution. So in your notes, do me a favor, leave a generous amount of space and start a new section. And go ahead and write this down. We're going to be talking about the Scientific Revolution. And the Scientific Revolution all focuses on this: changing the way that people viewed and understood the universe. So we're going to be talking a lot about how Europeans are going to show up, and they're going to start having different ideas on how the universe is mapped out, set up, and how they believe that the actual planets move in their rotations. But we'll talk a lot about that stuff when we get into class. I'll see you guys on Tuesday and Wednesday. Y'all have a good one, and as always, go Birds!